All right, let's jump right into this explainer. If you work in instructional design, corporate training, or, any kind of development role, you've probably noticed something. The textbook way we're supposed to do things? Yeah, it almost never matches the reality of sitting at your desk trying to get a project out the door. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating framework called the daily model. The creator of this model basically looked at the traditional pipelines we've all been taught and realized they were just completely mismatched with modern workflows. So what did they do? They built their own. Let's dig into exactly how they pulled this off, how it stacks up against the classics, and honestly, whether it might just be the silver bullet for the friction you're feeling in your own projects.
Think about your own day-to-day for a second. Do your projects actually start with a crisp, clean question? Standard design frameworks basically live in this fantasy world, what we could call the intake illusion. They just assume a stakeholder is going to walk up to you with a perfectly defined performance gap, flawless goals, and a totally blank slate for you to work your magic. But come on, is that how it happens? Or do you get forwarded an incredibly messy email chain, a folder full of half-baked slide decks, and maybe, if you're lucky, a single sentence of context? That exact point of frustration, that breaking point, is exactly why the author started questioning the established rules.
This really hits home when you look at the most famous framework out there, ADDIE. ADDIE, which stands for Analyze, Design, Develop, Implement, Evaluate, is literally the gold standard. It's day one stuff. But ADDIE kicks off right at Analyze. It just assumes that clean question is already sitting there waiting for you. The messy reality? Your project is an intake form or a super vague Slack message. There's this unspoken expectation that you, the designer, are somehow going to magically untangle the actual problem before the official analysis even starts. And that initial friction is exactly where ADDIE tends to fall flat on its face.
Which brings us to this absolutely brilliant, relatable quote. The author just flat out says, "I built my own instructional design model because ADDIE kept describing a job I don't have." I mean, how honest is that? They didn't invent a new model just to slap their name on something for bragging rights. They did it out of pure pragmatic survival. They walked away from the traditional models because those frameworks literally did not fit their day-to-day reality anymore. It's pretty bold to look at an industry pillar and say, yeah, this isn't working for me. But that realization is the spark for this entire new approach.
And here is the result of that spark. The daily model. 5 distinct steps: discover, analyze, learning solution, execute, and yield. Now, here's a funny little behind-the-scenes secret. The author openly admits they totally backed into this acronym just so it would spell their last name. Actually, scratch that. The original draft had 7 phases, and they squished it down to 5, partly just to make the branding work. It's a little cheeky, putting them in the same club as folks like Dick and Carey, who also have namesake models. But despite the clever naming trick, the actual mechanics inside these 5 steps are super substantive and tightly aligned with how work actually gets done today.
Okay, so here's the first major pivot. While ADDIE tells you to jump straight into analyzing, Daily hits the brakes and forces you to discover first. Why? Because somebody has to handle all that messy, unglamorous intake work we were just talking about. Before you analyze a single thing, you need a dedicated space to figure out where the request even came from. Who actually owns the performance gap? Is there legacy content lying around so you don't reinvent the wheel? This discover phase acts like a buffer zone. It acknowledges that just figuring out the boundaries of the mess is real, necessary work.
Right, so once that chaotic discovery phase is in the rearview mirror, Analyze can actually do its job. In the daily model, Analyze isn't a vague starting point. It's a strict, disciplined checkpoint. It's a literal go or no-go investigation. This is where you have to ask the really tough question. Is this even a training problem? Or are we looking at a broken process, a toxic environment, or a motivation issue that's just dressed up as a training request? The author notes they kept the rigorous discipline of the classic Dick and Carey model here, meaning you draft your objectives and assessments long before you ever touch the actual content. They just stop pretending you can do this the second an email arrives.
Moving down the pipeline, the next massive shift tackles how things actually get built. The old-school models love to put design and develop into 2 totally separate boxes. Daily smashes them together into one big phase called learning solution. The author makes a great point here, arguing that keeping design and development completely isolated is basically a waterfall fantasy. You know the idea, you design the perfect blueprint, hand it to a developer, and boom, it's built perfectly on the first try. In 13 years in the industry, the author says this has literally never happened once. Because, well, real projects just don't work like that.
By merging them together, Daily creates this unified learning solution phase that actually embraces real-world, messy iteration. Think of it a lot like the SAM model by Allen and Seitz, which also ditched ADDIE for a more agile loop.
In reality, you design a chunk, you build a quick prototype, you toss it to a subject matter expert, they give you a bunch of messy notes, you tweak it, and you build it again. It's fluid. Plus, let's be real, in today's workplace, the instructional designer and the developer are very often the exact same person. So keeping those tasks in rigid, separate silos is just making up fake bureaucracy.
Now let's fast forward to the end of the pipeline. Honestly, this might be the biggest philosophical shift in the whole framework. If you treat evaluation as something you only do at the finish line, you're quietly teaching a really bad habit. It makes it seem like checking your work is an afterthought. But if you're doing it right, formative evaluation, testing and adjusting, starts the second you write your very first learning objective. Carving out a whole final phase just for evaluation completely ignores all the checking you've already been doing. So Daily renames this final step to yield, and that completely changes the whole center of gravity.
So what does yield actually mean in practice? It goes way beyond asking, did people like the training? It asks, what did we actually produce? It's your summative results check. It's running through those classic Kirkpatrick evaluation levels 1 through 4. But most importantly, it's having that crucial return on investment conversation. It's where you go back to the stakeholders and prove that the messy problem you discovered way back in phase 1 is actually solved. And finally, it's the handoff, packaging up all the source files so the training can actually be maintained after you've moved on to the next fire. As the author perfectly summarizes it, evaluation is a measurement, but yield is the harvest.
Okay, hold on to your hats for a second. Let's talk about the number 29. Packed inside these 5 phases, the daily model has 29 distinct milestones, and they're locked behind 5 formal approval gates. I know, that sounds incredibly heavy, maybe even a little suffocating. But there is a massive, deliberate reason for all this structure. If you have ever watched a project's scope just explode completely out of control because no one formally signed off on anything, you know exactly why this is here. These 29 milestones and 5 gates are basically the ultimate defense against scope creep. Nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, moves forward until someone with real authority officially says yes.
But don't worry, the framework doesn't just hand you 29 empty checkboxes and wish you luck. To make this heavy process actually usable, the author mapped out concrete deliverables for every single milestone. And here's the absolute best part. True to how we work today, each step comes with a suggested AI prompt. This is such a game changer. It's specifically designed to eliminate what the author calls the blank page tax. When you're staring at a blinking cursor, desperately trying to draft a learner persona or a course outline, these AI prompts give you an immediate jumping-off point. It totally bridges the gap between high-level theory and a gritty daily toolkit.
But, and this is a big but, here's where the author actually calls out their own creation, which is super refreshing to see. For a massive, high-stakes enterprise build with 10 different stakeholders, those 29 milestones are your best friend. They protect you. But what about a quick 45-minute compliance update that some manager needs by Friday afternoon? Trying to force a tiny project through 29 milestones and 5 approval gates is literally absurd. A framework has to match the scale of the work, and the author totally admits that their shiny new model is just way too heavy for those quick turnaround jobs that take up half our week.
So how do we fix it? The author's solution is building in a documented light path. You keep the exact same 5 phases: discover, analyze, learning solution, execute, yield. But you intentionally collapse the internal milestones and rip out the formal gates for those small or fast jobs. By officially writing down this light version, the model is allowed to bend under pressure. Because think about it, if you don't build in that flexibility, the second someone says, "I need this tomorrow," the designer is just going to throw the whole framework out the window. A truly great model has to be able to scale down just as smoothly as it scales up.
All right, I want to leave you with a really provocative question straight from the author. They ask, if you've ever bent a framework to fit how you actually work, whether that's Addy, Sam, or something you cooked up yourself, did that change make you a sharper designer or just a more comfortable one? It's a fantastic point to chew on. When we start trimming corners to hit deadlines, are we actually streamlining the work? Or are we just dodging the hard, rigorous friction that creates great design? So let's bring it all together. What do you think of the daily model compared to the classics? Does it actually align with the messy reality of your workplace? And if you started using it tomorrow, what would you change? Seriously, keep those questions in mind the next time you're tempted to skip a step. Thanks for hanging out for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.